I think because I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness woman, there is this assumption that I automatically have a disdain for Jehovah's Witness men, which is not the case. I have a disdain for shitty humans, and that label is not reserved to any one gender. Yes, the Watchtower organization collectively is an extremely misogynistic, patriarchal environment. I believe the governing body is very dangerous. And even as individuals, I don't know how you get to that point. I don't know how you get to that level of power and influence over people, policing their medical choices, sex lives, telling them who they can and cannot speak to. Your conscience is just fully subjugated to a handful of men in upstate New York. It's bananas. I don't know how you get there without either being severely corrupt or at least deluded AF. However, there are men who, like me, were born into this belief system, had these expectations foisted upon them, who, like me, did not want to be there. And of course, there are young men who participated in and excelled in these roles because, they thought it was the right thing to do. It's just all they knew at the time. They were trying to either please their parents or it was just the environment they were born into. And I don't think that they should be judged harshly or assigned the characteristic of misogynistic simply because they were born into a machine that happened to be skewed more in their favor. Now, I do believe you reach a point where you do know better and you should do better. And if you are choosing to stay in that situation or stay in that environment where you are then part of the problem and you are hurting people, that's a different story. But let me be absolutely clear. Let me just absolutely clear about something. The organization collectively does not care about you, man or woman. Men may be able to play the game at a higher level or gain some clout solely on the basis of their sex, but generally speaking, the organization only cares about compliance. So I asked my husband and spoke to some of my ex-JW male friends for their feedback and some of their experiences of what they went through when they were in the organization. And I kind of just want to acknowledge how the organization used them too, as just another cog in the wheel. The following are 6 common struggles that they faced as men in the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. Number 1, pressure to serve. So young men in the organization are groomed from infancy to serve in positions of power. If they were born into the organization, they literally from infancy are put in a suit and tie. It may seem innocuous enough, oh, look how cute, his little church outfit. No, it is a very calculated dress code that reflects their overarching goal or their end game. Specifically, young men who grow up in the organization are expected to assume the role of what is called a ministerial servant, which is in other churches considered a deacon maybe. And then eventually those ministerial servants are expected to become elders who are like the pastors or priests of the congregation. So there's definitely a hierarchical system or theocratic ladder, if you will, that they are expected to climb as they get older. And in recent years, especially, there has been a call for more men to serve in these positions because the organization has been bleeding numbers in the past 10 years and they're finding that less and less interest is being expressed. At this point, they're so desperate for new blood, they're appointing young men, in their late teens, 18, 19, to be ministerial servants. And I think maybe for elders, early 20s, maybe 21, 22. I think everyone would agree that someone this young lacks the life experience and perspective to coach parishioners who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s on serious life issues, marital counseling, mental health issues, family issues. But what will also happen, what you'll notice with men in this age range, 30 and up, is that many of them won't reach out, and this will start to raise the eyebrows of the old timers who've been around a while. They're going to be like, okay, well, what's your deal? Why aren't you reaching out? Hey there, Steve. Why aren't you reaching out to serve? They have no interest participating in or playing that role. In a lot of cases, I know that they are secretly PMO. They are physically in the organization, but mentally they've checked out. So they don't actually believe. They just can't stomach living a lie by being a ministerial servant or an elder. But regardless of age, there is this implicit assumption that your number one priority in life should be to serve the congregation, to reach out and serve in some capacity. Number 2, pressure to follow orders. Okay, so I'm going to add a disclaimer here. I am not condoning or excusing the men who know better and are choosing to jeopardize the safety or well-being of others so they can kiss ass or cover their ass. But I do want to acknowledge that there is a definite pecking order. And if we're considering things in less severe terms, there is a constant pressure on these ministerial servants and elders to follow orders, to defer to their superiors, even if the instructions or directions they receive are questionable or impractical. And in all fairness, there are men who acknowledge this or have acknowledged this and have actually stepped down from their position because they just couldn't align themselves with the congregation politics anymore. And of course, there's automatically speculation as to why they stepped down, oh, he's spiritually weak or he must have done something wrong. It's usually the latter. But this compliance at all levels is routinely drilled into their brains. And unfortunately, this has resulted in basically good men, otherwise good men, making really poor decisions, such as, kowtowing to one main guy, a head honcho in the congregation, like the presiding overseer. I think it's called the coordinator of the body of elders, now is what they're calling it. And so in this same vein or thread, this includes serving on judicial committees where people have been expelled or removed from the congregation. Some of these men have unfortunately facilitated what amounts to lifelong trauma. Just the image of these men, sitting at that conference table has been burned into the brains of people who have suffered through these judicial sentences. And that's really the problem. You have some of these guys who, they've been there, they finally took a stand and left. And, you got men who continue to play the game despite the implications. And I'm hopeful that more start to do the right thing and buck the system, because they really have no right to orchestrate or dictate other people's lives. But I do believe that at least acknowledging your participation is a constructive first step in weakening and dismantling these structures where power is being abused. And unfortunately, as many have found out, they have found out that they too are not immune to the beast turning on them. There are elders and ministerial servants out there who refused to blindly follow orders and were promptly removed from their posts. So there's definitely a pressure to follow theocratic direction, even if those directions are completely ridiculous or harmful to others. Number 3, strain on family life. Okay, so some former elders have talked about the immense strain being an elder had on their family life. My father was an elder for decades, probably still is. I saw what that schedule did to my dad. It was brutal. My father would wake up at the crack of dawn, work a strenuous job. He would race home, so he'd get home sometimes at 6 o'clock, 6:30, take a quick shower, throw on a suit and tie, go to the meeting, 7:30 to 9:45. He often had to give parts like talks or sermons. And then after the meeting, after all that, would have basically like a surprise elders meeting, sprung on him at the last minute. It says, okay, well, all the elders after the meeting, please meet in the back room for a brief elders meeting. If you know, if you grew up in the 90s, you knew those elders meetings were not brief. Total bullshit. Basically, an elders meeting was like these little mini debriefings in the back conference room of the Kingdom Hall. And sometimes my father wouldn't get out till midnight. Mind you, he's got a family. He's got to go to work the next day. And elders aren't paid, okay? No paid clergy. So my father was doing this entirely on a voluntary basis. And I remember during a brief window when he wasn't serving, like he was stepping back to take a break, we moved to a new congregation. And as soon as we arrived, everybody was like, oh my God, he's here. We need you. We need more men serving. Oh, God, we could use your wisdom, blah, blah, blah. My father didn't hop on that. He wasn't quick to jump into being an elder again. Like, I specifically remember that. He was hesitant. Let me think about it, because he knew what it entailed. He knew how much energy it was going to take on his part to juggle his family responsibilities, his congregation responsibilities. He wasn't quick to jump at that again, but they wore him down. They wore him down. So he reluctantly, at least through my lens, he reluctantly became an elder again. And my experience, or his experience, is not unique. I had other peers in the congregation whose fathers served as elders, and they went through similar things. Their dad was just beat up on this constant hamster wheel that, they just couldn't be present for their families. How could they be? They barely had any time for themselves. They're not golfing, they're not retired, they're not out fishing. Like boom, 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 boom. Non-stop. And you add on top of all this, they're the breadwinners of the family. So there's all this pressure on them to provide for their families. So it's understandable why a lot of guys or young men, didn't want to reach out for positions in the congregation because they knew what that entailed. It's absolutely naive to think that this wasn't going to have some kind of negative repercussions on your personal or family life. Number 4, pressure to conform. Okay, so I know this is going to come as a shocker to some, but not everyone who reached out for these positions, was a vile misogynist or had bad intentions. They wanted to help people. They wanted to serve in some capacity. Their motives were genuine. Sadly, some of these, when they were confronted with just blatant sexism or injustice, they had this erroneous belief, bless them. They thought they could change the system from the inside out. Well, maybe if I'm a ministerial servant or an elder, maybe if I get inside, maybe I can instigate change. Maybe there's someone I could talk to. Maybe I can get in there and cause, positive change. But of course, the system, I've talked about this before, the system is cancerous. Trying to reform the elder arrangement is like trying to remove a tumor that is already metastasized. The reality is you have to rein in any individuality or dissenting opinion. You basically have to resign to being a drone, a yes man, if you wish to participate in that environment. And even if you don't hold a position in the congregation, you're just a regular rank and file member, there's still this expectation, that because you're a man, you should just always have your shit together and look the part at least. You should at least give the impression that you aspire to be an elder one day. But I knew growing up where I did, I grew up in like a metropolitan area where people were, a lot of these brothers were artists, musicians who quite literally colored outside the lines and really struggled to fit this mold. It just wasn't them. It is absolutely a misconception that every guy in the organization aspires to be the poster child for the organization or wield authority over others. Many feel like they can't just be themselves or simply just worship in peace without this pressure to conform to this hyper-conservative image. Number 5, sacrifice financial security. Okay, so this one's weird. I'm of two minds on this one. On the one hand, you're telling your parishioners, don't pursue higher education. Higher education is bad. And this is not right because depending on the brother, some brothers would thrive in school and would be able to secure a well-paying job that would allow them to properly care for their families. On the other hand, controversial opinion, college is not for everyone. There are men in construction, landscaping, HVAC businesses. They learn some kind of trade and they're killing it. They're doing very well for themselves. But, if you're self-employed, you really got to hustle. But either way, the organization tells men that they have to be the head of the house. They have to provide for their families, even if the wife makes more money. You're the head of the house, but then they want to dictate how these men make a living. The parameters, with zero consideration of personal temperament, talents, where their strengths would be best utilized in a way that's best for them to provide for their families. Basically, the organization comes first. Whatever you end up doing, college, trade school, your ass better be at every meeting. Wife and children in tow. We don't care about the physical, emotional, or financial toll this is taking on your family. Just make sure the organization is your number one priority. Number 6, pressure to take the lead. So an obvious common thread through all of this is that women have to be submissive to men. And again, this makes a lot of the men, believe it or not, uncomfortable because they know that their wives or just other sisters in the congregation may very well have more experience and knowledge than them and would be better suited in leadership roles. Now, generally speaking, I do believe that a man and woman might have strengths in different areas. And in that vein, it would be beneficial for both to bring their strengths to the table, to contribute and collaborate. I do think there's a balance. I do think there needs to be balanced, reasonable discourse. I don't think someone should be awarded a position or hold a position based solely on their sex or other superficial characteristics. I believe someone should have the job or position because they are qualified, which I am sure someone out there is going to get their feathers ruffled over that. The problem is, in the Jehovah's Witnesses, the responsibility for making decisions and taking the lead is placed squarely on the shoulders of men, and it always has been that way. In this modern age, there has been zero forward momentum in that regard as an organization. Women are strictly prohibited from holding any positions of leadership, including judicial committees, which means that if a young woman who is on the chopping block, the elders are considering removing her from the congregation for some perceived sin, in which she will then be shunned by her family and friends, you would have 3 men asking her intrusive, inappropriate questions about her body, possibly her first sexual experience, and this is without the presence of a parent or another woman. And again, this is a little bit of a tricky situation because it's not automatic that if you have a woman on that judicial committee that she's necessarily going to be merciful. She may very well be just as judgmental, bring her own bias in, clutching her pearls, you little whore. Okay, they exist. All right, no bullshit. But the other option of not allowing a woman to sit in on these judicial committees is it creates a glaring power imbalance where a 16-year-old girl or whatever, a minor young woman, even if she's in her early 20s or whatever, she's in the presence of 3 grown older men. How's that any better? It's not, and has led to a legacy of men abusing their power. So again, this whole power imbalance, not having women or giving them the opportunity to assume leadership positions has led to, not only bad actors abusing their power, but has also led to good men feeling awkward and overwhelmed at the idea that they are fully responsible for making decisions that they know is going to impact someone's life. And, they would appreciate a woman's perspective or experience. A lot of men believe that it would be wise and reasonable and long overdue for the organization to reform their policies around women in leadership positions. Might even, garner the respect and trust of people currently in the organization who are on the fence, who are just fed up and fatigued with the lack of progressive policies, or fed up with the status quo. The organization might actually do better and retain some numbers, but we all know that that's not the case. So anyways, that's all I got. Yes, I will be doing a follow-up on the struggles of Jehovah's Witness women. If you are a former elder, ministerial servant, or just a guy in the congregation right now, what are your thoughts and experiences? Leave a comment below. As always, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.